When someone has completed their family and they've achieved a healthy pregnancy and a healthy baby, or a few children, which would be wonderful if that's what they wanted, the dilemma of excess embryos is the IVF procedure gave them the opportunity to achieve their dreams. So for them to have surplus embryos, it's not just an easy decision to go, okay, we've finished, let's move on.
We did all of this hard work, we went through all of this stress of creating these embryos. What do we do with them now? And that's a real problem for a number of people. An embryo is a mass of cells that arises after the fertilization has occurred. It is a potential for a pregnancy, but that's all it is. It is a potential for a pregnancy. When an embryo is frozen, that's usually done by a process called vitrification, which is a very rapid cooling technique. And the embryos are in fact stored at minus 196 degrees Celsius in our storage tanks. I would have thought that there are over 100,000 embryos stored across the nation. Most people who freeze embryos will actually use them for in their own cycle. And they can stay stored for many, many years. So in Australia, we allow people to store them for 5 years. Then after 5 years, they can then renew them and then continue the storage for up to 10 years. But couples who have surplus embryos have a number of options to them when the time comes to make a decision.
One of them is to thaw them out, but not transfer them. So that is disposing of the remaining embryos and not using them. The second option is to donate them to another recipient, so someone who also desperately wants a family and needs embryos to fall pregnant. Another option, the third option, is to donate them to science or research. If they decide to donate, they will come to counselling sessions. We speak about all the issues that are involved, which would be legislation, expectations, the child's right to knowing their genetic identity, what they hope to achieve out of getting it, out of donating their embryos, what relationships they will expect from the recipients. Are they able to donate altruistically without being able to say, we want to know how this child is raised? The best decision for them is the one they can live with, so we really do not put any emphasis on what's the right decision. Often there's a very big difference between your cognitive thoughts but what you could actually do, because the ramifications are big.
Out of the last data set that we have of donation or assisted reproduction in Australia, there were only just over 400 embryo donation cycles in Australia, and that represents only about 0.5% of all of the cycles that are undertaken in Australia and New Zealand.
There's a few options. The internet is always probably the biggest, most popular, and there are donor embryo sites where they would have forums and discussions and get to know somebody via that channel. The other way is that every IVF clinic has what we call a waiting list.
In our unit, the average waiting time, depending on the situation, is somewhere between 1 to 3 years. Now, that's much better than, for example, accessing donor eggs. Once a couple makes a decision that they want to access donor embryos, there is specific legislation that in Australia and New Zealand that precludes commercialisation of this aspect. So we're not allowed to charge for any element of this.
Australia has legislation that everything we do is in the best interest of the child. So all of the donor gametes or any donation needs to be altruistic. Every child wants to be loved, and to get the message that they were loved and wanted well before they were created is an incredible gift. And children don't ever want to be lied to. So they want to know, I am mum and dad, and on the birth certificate, the birth mother is the mother and father, if there is both parents involved. And the donors are donors. They are very kind people who donated their embryos so their mum and dad could have a loving family. It's not the child's whole identity. It's a part of how they were created, and they were made with love. And for a child to know that there are other people who are very giving to help others is also an incredible lesson. So for the donors' children, they get that lesson as well.